This is Ship It with Justin Garrison and Autumn Nash, a podcast about everything that happens after Git push. Ship It is brought to you by Fly.io, the home of changelog.com. Launch your apps close to your users all around the world. Learn how at Fly.io.
Our friends at Fire Hydrant offer modern engineering teams less stress from ring to retro, full end-to-end incident management, alerting, on-call, and of course, streamlining every aspect of your incident process. From webhook to alert trigger to notifications to incidents open to retro tasks to mean time to X analytics, everything is inside Fire Hydrant for modern engineering teams. And what you're about to hear are real reactions from PagerDuty users when seeing signals from Fire Hydrant for the first time.
PagerDuty, I don't want to say they're evil, but they're an evil that we've had to maintain. I know all of our engineering teams, as well as myself, are interested in getting this moving the correct direction. As right now, just managing and maintaining our user seats has become problematic.
That's really good. Actually, this is a consistent problem for us and teams. Is that covering these sorts of ad hoc time frames is very difficult. Putting in like overrides and specific days and different new shifts is quite onerous.
Well, and you did the most important piece, which is didn't tie them together, because that's half the problem with PagerDuty, right? Is I get all these alerts and then I get an incident per alert. And generally speaking, when it goes sideways, you get lots of alerts because lots of things are broken, but you only have one incident.
Yeah, I'm super impressed with that, because being able to assign to different teams is an issue for us, because like the one alert fires for one team and then it seems like to have to bounce around, and it never does, which then means that we have tons of communication issues because like people aren't updated.
No, I mean, to be open and honest, when can we switch?
Okay, the next step is to go to firehydrant.com/signals, assemble the team, and work the problem without a single swivel of the chair. Fire Hydrant delivers end-to-end incident management and on-call alerting for the modern software teams. Get started for free. Once again, firehydrant.com/signals.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Ship It. I am your host, Justin Garrison, and with me as always is Autumn Nash. How's it going, Autumn?
So excited to talk to Mandi. She is amazing.
Yeah, Mandi is a wonderful guest on the show today, and this is what I'm calling our retro series. Whenever we're talking about something that's like 15 years or older is going to be amazing, and today we get to talk to Mandi about AOL chat rooms.
First of all, that was like my first exposure to how much I love computers and the internet and finding your people. AOL was like it for me. That is something I used so much of as a kid that like got me hooked on computers and like the community that you can get through like your nerdy habits. So I'm really, and not just that, but her personality is amazing. Like it is hard to find someone, for one, that's a woman that worked in infrastructure and like resiliency and all that good stuff. And then the fact that like she's just hilarious. Like her personality is fire.
So we will get to that. And actually, the more I think about it too, like AOL chat rooms are kind of like the original social networks, right? Like it was the original place. I mean, like
it is. That is the original place to find nerdy community. Like
there was plenty of other like BBSs and things like that people were finding, but like that was like
the first mainstream-ish.
Right. The barrier to entry
yes.
in the 90s was a lot higher. And so once that like endless September sort of thing came around with IRC, and then people's like, oh, you can just jump online, do this dial-up thing.
I think it made it accessible, and I think that people didn't know those communities existed. And then all of a sudden, like, this is before Reddit, this is before Tumblr, this is before all the like other things became a thing and got popular. But like, this is the first exposure to, for one, meeting your besties online and not knowing them and then
Right. You didn't know who the person was
yeah,
at all.
and
No
then
pictures.
and then meeting people based off of interest, right? So just purely off of interest people that you've met from all over the world. This was the first exposure to that, really.
Yeah. And I think in a lot of ways, the online social networks are reverting into these smaller knits.
It is. We went from like the globalness of Twitter, like being able to find people from all over just based off of what they're saying, back kind of into the little corners of like community because, I don't know, the erosion of Twitter.
Well, I mean, it's Twitter, but also just like realizing that like your network, you can't keep all those connections, right? Like as much as you have, thousands of people you may like on some social network, it's like, actually, I just want to go like have a DM with someone for a while. And
I don't know. I think it's definitely easier to post pictures of your kid on Facebook so everybody can see them. And then you don't have to go and like DM them to each person. And like, it makes
as a distribution method.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like that's the, like,
well, not just that, but like keeping up every now and then. I think it's really easy as an adult to forget like this person exists, or like you get so wrapped up into like getting your kids around and like, your job. It's really hard to always kind of, social media means you can comment and be like, oh my God, your kid got so big, and like, oh, congratulations on that promotion. And you get that little bits of like keeping each other in each other's lives until you get more time, and I think that we are risking losing that. There are good parts, but at this point, Facebook is so toxic. Twitter is getting like, have you seen the amount of women who have been harassed on Twitter in tech in the last week? It is like the sad, angry dudes of tech are in force right now. Like this whole like blame everything on DEI has gotten like out of hand. Like it is ridiculous. And Elon is like just lighting the fire.
I have been thinking about joining a BBS. I found out there's BBSs that still exist.
What is a BBS exactly?
It's a bulletin board system. And it was like the OG, like Reddit sort of forums, right? It was just like a forum basically, but like old school. And I read this book called Broadband, which is 2 words, broad as in woman, and then band like a group of women. And it was about the women who created.
I love play on words like that.
It was an amazing title and a great book about like women who created early technology and the internet and these foundations. So, but I found out there was someone who runs a BBS in New York. She ran one of the very first BBSs, and it still is available today. Like you literally, like if you want to sign up, it's a monthly subscription. You pay, they send you a packet in the mail with like your sign-on.
This is why I love that you're my like tech friend, because you are so not like average tech bro.
I'm pretty mid according to my kids, so.
You're awesome husband that makes cute stuff for your wife, and you're always reading and informing yourself somewhere. Some people just like to virtue signal, and we're like, no, please don't, just stop. But like, I think this segues really well into like my article about like why women in tech spaces are shutting down. Like Women Who Code is shutting down. One of the Portland's women's group is shutting down. Chic Geeks is shutting down. And Women Who Code, almost every female tech account on Twitter had something to say about how much women that code has like had an impact on their career and getting them in. Like it is one of the biggest tech organizations. For one, I'm always constantly sharing their like tech jokes on Instagram. They're fire. They help so many women. They've done so many classes. They do so many summer camps for girls. They have so many speaking opportunities, so many scholarships. Like this is one of the biggest, and it is shutting down because of lack of funding. Because the first thing that happened when tech wasn't 0 interest rates and making hand over fist, well, they're still making hand over fist money, but when we got into the supposed tech recession, the first thing they cut was DEI, recruiters, and any initiative to get people into tech that are not your average people getting into tech. They were the first teams to go, and then the funding from all the tech companies that were going into these like initiatives that were any kind of, what was the word? I guess like donations, those got cut too. So it's really sad to see such a impactful organization close down.
I saw that and I was like, what happened? Like, it would seem everything from the outside, not being part of it. Like it seemed like it was successful and it was growing and things were happening. And then realizing how much does depend on corporate sponsorship, and in-person events are so important. Where during COVID, it was like, oh, great. Like I naively would think that like, oh, cool, virtual events are more accessible for people and it's easier for anyone to join at any time from anywhere without travel.
I do think they are, though. I think that they're extremely important.
Yeah, there is a lot of importance there, but also there's a lot of importance on that in-person connection. And like when I think of most, every job that I've had in my past, it came from like meeting someone in person somewhere at a meetup or a conference or
there is a good medium, right? Like, so I think smaller meetups are really good online because people don't always show up to the ones that are smaller. Like if you have like a monthly meetup, even if like, I think you can do them in person or online. But I think for one with women, we're typically more caregivers. We're typically, a lot of men will have wives that don't work so they can kind of pick up the extra, but very few women have husbands that don't work that do the caregiving, right? So even if you both are switching off, like it's still a very different situation, right? So like I think any type of virtual, like it's better for moms, it's better for disabled people, it's better for military spouses, it's better for like accessibility for people. But I also think that in-person community, like one thing I really noticed is React Miami. I've never seen so many women in pictures. I've never gone, but a lot of the front end conferences seem to also have more women there, which is sad because the conferences that would be more for my work, you look and they're the same people. But like, you know what I mean? Like it is a very distinct difference. Like Scale was the most girls I've seen in a bathroom at a tech conference besides Grace Hopper, and wasn't that even me.
Being at Scale and being part of the committee, like the sponsorship was down.
Yeah.
And that was difficult. That made it hard to run a conference at that scale, at that size, to be able to like, hey,
and Scale's not even that big. You know what I mean?
No, it's a pretty small-ish community-run conference, but it is still primarily in person. There are live streams and make some of that available, but we don't have the bandwidth or the ability to like do the online networking with folks. It's just like, oh, like come hang out in this room. And like, and from my experience, a lot of that just never happened anyway. A lot of folks didn't stick around. They're like, actually, I have something else to do. And if you're at your computer, you're going to be distracted anyway. And so it's like, what's kind of the point there? But also from a speaker's perspective, like I have done virtual events where literally no one showed up.
I've actually had really good turnouts for virtual events.
That's great. Like I remember I worked on one for weeks and it was just me and the person who was like running, like introduced me. The only person that streamed it with me. And I was just like, I felt so broken. Like,
I think we have to remember though that those recordings last forever. Like for instance, with Millspouse Coders, because we're all in different time zones, a lot of times our attendance will look like not a lot of people are showing up, but we get a ton of views after because people are in different time zones. And sometimes like if you're chasing a kid or if you have a doctor's appointment, you can't watch it then, but they'll go back and watch it at night. Like we get a ton of views when everybody is like settling down and they have a second to sit and kind of, go over the material. So I think it also makes for like consumption when people have the time. Like even when I go to like an in-person conference, sometimes I'll go back and listen to a talk that was really good so I can take better notes.
I am one of the few people that will watch conference talks on YouTube, but I also know that like a ton of views is not much, or like most of the conferences will have a dozen or so views. It's not hundreds, it's not thousands. Like the really large corporate sponsored events, like those will get some stuff because they put ad money behind it. But a lot of this stuff that's like, oh, if I have the choice of like a slimmed down YouTubeified version of that talk that's 10 minutes long, or the one with slides where someone's talking to me for 40 minutes, like I'm gonna pick the YouTube one 10 minutes every time. And that's where if you're on those platforms and you're in those ecosystems, like it just makes it easier to kind of consume the snackable content. Like I'll scroll through, a bunch of shorts before I even click on that one that was 10 minutes long, right? Like that's all of those things are trade-offs.
I think it depends because some people I won't say never, but they are less likely to get that experience, right? Like if you don't have the money to be able to go to those conferences or to be able to tend to take off work, like a lot of students may not come from the background where they can go to those conferences or take time off work. They could be caregiving for their families. They could be working a job just to like be in college. So I think definitely at a certain point, yes, that you get there, but some people don't even have that opportunity and that's the only way they have access to it. So I just think it depends on perspective.
And I absolutely think that the information should be available.
Yeah.
And we should make that freely available. And I'm even looking at pulling a lot of my own personal content off of platforms like TikTok and YouTube and making it available on my site without ads. and like, hey, this could just be on my website. You don't need to even spend the time commitment of like, I have to watch an ad to do this thing. Like, if you want to get it for free without advertising, I'm going to try to make that stuff available for people. And that's super important too. But obviously discovery at that point is hard and people don't know where to look.
I really think that is one of the best things about tech at one point is the fact that it's so accessible to be able to get free content online that you can do in your own time. And that gives people the opportunity to be able to get into tech when we weren't doing as heavily gatekeeping as we kind of are now.
My article is executing crons at scale. It's all about cron jobs at Slack, where Slack has these abilities to run reminders and jobs and things that run in the backgrounds. And I loved how this article started off with just like, we had a cron server. Like most every large company in the world, there is a cron server that sits there somewhere that has a cron tab, and people modify the cron tab to run their jobs. And at some level, that becomes not good enough because the server doesn't scale, too many conflicts, errors are difficult, all this stuff just gets in the way. And I remember my time at like Disney Animation, we had 2 cron servers, right? Like that was like how we scaled it up. We're like, oh, well, this cron server was for this group of people and this cron server was for that group of people. And we just scaled it up that way. You SSH in, you modify your cron tab. Maybe you check it into some sort of config management, but in general, it was just like a server that was always running to run jobs whenever. And in this case, they decided at Slack that they needed something better and something a little more scalable. And so, of course, Kubernetes was the answer. And not just Kubernetes with like a custom job scheduler. Like this has full on a Kafka queue, Vitess, which is like a distributed MySQL database, and a custom scheduler, as well as their custom platform on top of Kubernetes. So I think it's a really interesting, like, once you step beyond the machine, what components do you need to make this scalable or usable for a large company, and especially at like these ad hoc jobs? Because I can set up a Slack reminder for any time, so they can't predict these things, and it will send me a message, and that literally gets queued on their job scheduling system, and then comes back to me as a message. And so I found that just like the practicality of like how that works to be really interesting.
I find this interesting for one because I think Slack seems to be a lot of people's favorite alternative to keeping like in touch with people, you know? Like I think Slack seems to me like it's more loved than like Teams and other alternatives. I love Slack personally. And I think it's cool that they've rolled out so many different services and ways that you can use Slack as more than just that way to like keep in touch with work and, you know, with friends and yada yada. But I also think it's really interesting that it's built in Golang, because did you see that like tweet that everybody was arguing about, like if people should go to Rust and JavaScript and like I think another language, because they were like all the other languages are like not going to be used and everything's going to be built in TypeScript, Rust, and like one other thing. And I was like, what? Like, do you know all the infrastructure that's built in Java and C++ and like a million other things? I actually think Rust is going to be very impactful, because it's being like so many things are going to be rewritten in it, like the kernel. But how did you just completely forget that Go and like other things existed? And like there's so much legacy like software that is built in Java and C++ and C that is just it's just how like PHP is gonna live on like after we're all dead and buried. So it's cool.
There's plenty of COBOL and Perl running out there. So,
and the people that write COBOL are getting paid right now because they're the only ones
all
left.
8 of them.
Yes. Interesting. It's also running on Golang and Bedrock. That's pretty cool.
So Bedrock is that's actually their abstraction over Kubernetes. Like I get the name confused with like there's other tools that are Bedrock. They have a platform built on top of Kubernetes, which makes sense with Go because all the Kubernetes tooling is Go anyway. So you have your kube builders and your scheduler stuff is all Go based. And so they're just like, well, let's just pick that. And so, yeah, they have a platform on top of Kubernetes called Bedrock. And then they built this like messaging queuing system with a scheduler.
Oh, I've never heard of Flock for Linux too. I'll have to check that out. Have you ever used that?
Nope.
Oh, it's used to manage locking scripts. Okay, cool.
Right. Usually you touch a file and say like, if the file exists, then you don't run. And so, yeah, it's a way to do that better.
It's pretty. I'm always looking for new Linux tools to try out.
So let's go ahead and jump into the interview with Mandi and talk all about AOL chat rooms. Welcome today, Mandi Walls. She is a DevOps advocate at PagerDuty. But Mandi, first I wanted to start off with ASL.
Yeah, right?
If anyone knows what that acronym means, it'll bring you back to a time, but we want to talk to Mandi about what were you doing? How long was this? 20 years ago or so? Like, what was the infrastructure you were responsible for?
Almost exactly 20 years ago. I started at AOL in the summer of 2004, and I was there until 2011. And
Wow.
in the space of that time, I ran AOL's channels. So news, sports, entertainment, games, games.com, movie phone. I ran
Movie phone,
AOL.com
yes.
for a while, and in multiple platforms as things migrated. So yeah, sat in Dulles, RIP, pour one out for the Dulles campus. It's now been torn down. But yeah.
I love that was amazing.
All gone. All gone.
How did you get started there? Like, what brought you to AOL?
I was working at the National Institutes of Health. So we were down in the DC area, right? And I was at NIH working for NHGRI, which is the Human Genome Institute at NIH. And we were doing a combination of Solaris and Linux stuff. And I'm a Linux person. And Solaris is it is what it is.
It was a silence there. That's what it was.
Right?
Like, okay,
Is this a sweary podcast? And then AOL advertised, hey, we're looking for Linux administrators, because it turned out they were moving off of commercial Unix onto Linux. I was like, oh, that sounds more interesting than running a bunch of scientific software, which Human Genome is super interesting, but like it's its own pocket. It doesn't move quite that fast and wasn't at that time. Yeah, I interviewed and joined at AOL. So it was also much closer to home because I was living in Reston and NIH is in Bethesda. So that meant taking a horrible DC beltway to work every day. So
That sounds not fun.
not even a little bit.
So bringing us back 20 years, what did the tech stack look like for an AOL chat room?
Yeah, so AOL had a mixed bag. So it's interesting because at the time, no one really talked about what they were running. Like everything was very secretive at that time. And even to the point where if you wanted to know what was going on at AOL, you probably had to read Kara Swisher's columns to find out what was going on, because things were just, kind of secretive there. But like the platforms behind all of AOL's products were all significantly different, which was super weird and really just bizarre at the time. There was no consolidation at that time. Everything had kind of gone its own direction for the things that it needed. And like they had bought other stuff, like Prodigy was in there, and it ran on like 36-bit machines. And you're like, where did these even come from? Why is this still here?
36-bit?
Right? Super weird. And there was just other weird stuff in the mail system, and chat has its own infrastructure. And then we worked on the website. So I was in web operations, and our stuff had been a combination of Solaris and IRIX.
Okay.
Right? Because if you got money to burn, you might as well buy IRIX. And they were moving everything onto commodity hardware and into, at the time, RHEL. So the early versions of RHEL. So 2.1 or whatever that first release was at the time. And that's what we were hired on for. There's a couple of us that were all brought in around the same time in 2004 to help with the Linux side of the house, and just stuck around. So, but yeah, it was a big mix. There a lot of different stuff behind the scenes over there, because everything was built at different times, and as they add new features, they just built whatever worked best for that platform, and off it went.
Whatever they knew, right? From some other experience of like, oh, I played with this last week, so I'm going to deploy it to production now.
Yeah. And off it went.
I feel like that still happens a lot, though. Like companies, especially big enterprises, don't let their teams talk to each other, and then they just end up building like there's 6 different databases.
Yes.
You're like, but why? You could share like knowledge about like the one, or like, especially if it works for.
Or you could have your little empire over there, and I can have my little empire over here, and we can battle it out.
Never will they war. This is not.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, you just described microservices to some extent, right? It's just like,
Yeah, right?
This is just like madness over here, and now we like consolidated, and now we went back to madness.
It's just wild. Like they're not allowed to talk about it, and like it's just, I'm like, you could have got advice or something. Like I don't know.
Not the way things ran at the time. Super crazy.
So you had this mishmash of infrastructure and tooling, and you're moving it onto RHEL. And what were you responsible for in that migration? Were you doing like provisioning and Linux servers? I'm assuming this is, it's hardware stacks that you have data centers places. And
at the time, we were buying a combination of, well, they put everything up for bid, right? Because you're going to buy $500,000 of hardware at a time. So you get like a 6-month bid out on whatever they're going to put in the data center. So sometimes we get Dell machines. Sometimes HP would win the bid. So like you'd be flipping back and forth. We'd have a mix of hardware, a mix of ages. Things would go back on lease return. A lot of the gear at that time, they're in owned data centers, but the gear is leased. So they go back. And so you're just constantly refreshing the farms, and all the fleets were like constantly in motion for things coming in and out. And if you needed to scale anything up, like that's a requisition. Like it's not a slide your credit card in the cloud and get more gear. It was, oh, it's a ticket, and it's like 4 teams are involved, and there's all this like budgeting. And if you happen to get extra hardware, you like hide it in a different project for a while.
You don't tell anybody.
Right? So you didn't have to return it, and it would just kind of sit there a little. Nobody's going to notice. There's 4 or 5 machines over there just in case we need one. So there's a lot of begging, borrowing, and stealing of systems around the system because we could not get capacity onto the floor fast enough for the way things were being built out. It was just absolutely nuts.
So this is 2004. So it's like CDs started disappearing from supermarkets in the late 90s or so. So it's like this wasn't dial-up days. This is like AOL post.
Well, dial-up was still like printing money at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But you're moving into like you have these services, and what kind of capacity are we talking about? Is this like we have hundreds of machines, we have thousands of machines, we have like dozens of data centers? What sort of scale? I mean,
all of that.
Okay, like AOL was big, like it was like the thing.
Yeah.
And now I like read white papers that are like, oh, we have like 5 million hosts over here. I'm like, that's what? Like that's a different number.
There probably weren't 5 million hosts on the internet in 2004,
exactly.
Right? Like just the capacity constraint was so different. But yeah, 2004 was sort of the beginning of Web 2. So the beginning of what we called the portal era, right? So Yahoo and AOL and that stuff. And Google was just kind of rising at that point, right? So part of the insanity was like we had our own web server, right? So AOL server was written in C.
Oh, like you had your own. Okay.
No,
like,
yeah,
there's
exactly.
no Apache here. We're just
no, not at all. Not until like 2008, I think is when we started going to Apache. So yeah, it was AOL server, which is C core with TCL as the user language. So TCL, tool command language. If you're not as gray as me, you probably have never seen it, right? Its other claim to fame is that it ran TiVo. Like the TiVos were programmed in TCL, right? Like so it was AOL server and TiVo, right? Doing TCL. And yeah, so we're porting all that stuff over from the Solaris boxes onto Linux boxes and spreading it out because the capacity at the time was kind of stranded. So AOL had regional data centers and they were large and they were owned. Like that was the big deal at the time. Like you owned your data center. And we're getting into as things were growing in capacity. So at the time, AOL.com was like the 6th largest site on the internet, right? So it was big. And so we're spreading things out, trying to co-locate things closer to users. And this is at the same time the rise of like global DNS sharing. So you had Akamai was the commercial provider of the time, right, for that stuff, where you go to www.aol.com and it would point you to the closest place. And that was Akamai handling all of that stuff. So we had hundreds of servers in a dozen locations to serve the US. And like were these little pods that ran with all the stuff you needed on the back end as well. Because when you log in as an AOL user, it knows all this stuff about you. Mm-hmm. So it knows who you are and what you like and what you want to see on the homepage, right? How much mail you have, like all this stuff. So we had to bring all that stuff with us when we log into these or load up these localized data centers. So there's a whole lot of stuff all over the place at that time. And all these like the owned data centers, the big ones, and then these colos. So it was crazy. There was just a lot of stuff everywhere.
Mandi, I love you. I don't know you, but we're going to be besties. Do you know how hard it is to get people who work in infrastructure with a personality? Like,
oh, we could talk. Yeah.
Can we just talk? You said pour one out for like the day. Like, we are right here. Like, I love you. And where have you been my whole life? We're going to be besties. Obviously, cloud and on-prem have their place, right? But because you really like you were in the trenches with on-prem and like with building infrastructure 20 years ago, is there ever a time when people get like, you know how sometimes we think back at the past and we're like, oh, it was great, but it wasn't great? Like, is there any, like, you just made me feel so grateful for the fact that I started tech in the cloud, because like, yo, like that's a lot. So like, is there anything when people say stuff about running infrastructure on-prem and they make it sound easy, do you ever like side-eye them and you're like,
Oh, absolutely. Like if you haven't been running a crash cart down the cold aisle trying to plug in and fix something, like you haven't lived. But also, I feel bad for you. Like it wasn't fun.
I love you so much.
It wasn't fun, man. It wasn't fun.
It was a great experience, but the fun was not a word for it. This is
Not at all. We learned a lot of lessons. Like that was the learning period, right? Like we know what not to do. Like there's a reason people love the clouds, because like this other stuff is mayhem and it's just crazy.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like they both have their place, and there is a point where on-prem just makes more sense. Like, you know, there's just how it is. But like sometimes I feel like we romanticize things a little bit when we get too far into.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of people like infrastructure people like the control of being on-prem and like being able to like artisanally curate their switch ports and like all this stuff.
It's like when people start making coffee and they do pour over and they're like, because I need it to take 35 minutes. And you're like, bro, like you could have just made an espresso. Like
life is too short for this.
We are a culture of like sometimes liking control too much into misery. Like,
yes.
Like when people are like, I want to like control my own servers for social media. And I'm like, dude, I have to do that at work. Like, I don't want to do
I don't want
Like, I think we get to a point where people like really romanticize too many options. And then I'm like, you know what? I've got a whole life and maybe I don't need all of those options.
Right? Totally. Definitely like that. Yeah.
I love you. We're going to be besties. You're so funny. Okay, like what is the craziest thing that happened to you when you worked at AOL? Did you ever have like a big outage or like...
Oh, absolutely.
What was the worst? Tell me like the best horror stories. Because like I just want you to know that you made 12-year-old me so freaking happy. I was like sneaking on the internet at like 10 o'clock at night when my parents went to bed. Like the sound of AOL starting up is like the sound of my childhood, okay? Like you made my whole little teenage nerdy like finding friends on the internet life, okay?
That's so cool.
You powered my teenage years. Like
the irony is I was never an AOL user before I joined AOL. Like I had no experience with the service at all because it was a long distance phone call from my parents' house to the local pop. So that was not going to happen from my parents' house. But yeah, the biggest outage we probably had, the one that still gives me nightmares. So one of the deep configurations in AOL server is that you can actually like get into it and see what each individual thread is doing. It's super cool, right? It can tell you exactly what request every thread is serving. But you can also then see, hey, all my threads are full. What is going on? And again, then you have to get into the configuration and tweak how many threads there are. So when we were doing a deploy to AOL.com, and I think we were in 5 or 6 data centers at that time, and you drain one, load the software, and pull it back up. And then it rebalances on the global DNS. Well, it would load up and then the threads would fill. And you're like, what is going on? Why are the threads full? Something in the new software is just a little bit too slow. And it turns out we only had 10 threads available on every server, which is not enough, right? At the time, it seems like, 10 threads in there, it's pretty quick, but it slows down enough that it would block the entire thing. So what you get is a stampede. And so one data center would fall over and then all the traffic would swing to another data center. And then that data center would get flooded and fall over and all the requests would fail over to another data center. So you could watch all the traffic sort of spike all over the place until we got a fix pushed out to get more threads into all the systems. So it was fascinating, but also kind of a nightmare because we're dealing with, push-based SSH in a loop, really, to get all these configs out to all these systems, and then finding we're using any version control for any of this. Oh, yeah. Like, come on, it's 2006 or 2007. That wasn't going to happen. And so there's certainly no configuration management. Like, we weren't doing any of that cool stuff. So yeah, we're just sitting there waiting in a loop for all this to fix itself. So the whole farm would quiesce and all the services would come back up. So that was a bit of a nightmare. It took about half an hour to get the whole thing straightened out.
And I mean, that question I had was like, how did you do those deploys? And it was basically because there was no version control, there was no config management, no such thing as containers. And so it's just like, I have a file, it works on my system, SEP it to every machine, right?
100%. And they're all bare metal. It's all bare metal at that time too, right? There's no VMs, there's containers, everything's bare metal. So everything's individually IP'd, off it goes. And you have to push to each one.
So you had your CSV file of all your inventory.
Yeah, we had a machines.dat, right?
Yeah.
Was its name. And it was a text file. It was space delimited, right? So white space.
Yep. So you're awking those fields and you're just like,
pulling
go.
that out, piping it right into the loop, and off it will go. Yeah, it was crazy.
All the bad words I say to Git, you're making me really grateful for it.
Yes. Be thankful for Git.
I've said some really mean things to it, and now I feel like I need to go back and apologize.
I know. It's karma, right? Like, it comes back to bite you. And like, that one experience was like a big part of why I went to Chef after I left AOL, because like, there has to be a better way to do this.
But I feel like you were like, I didn't know you when you worked there or what you did, but I feel like your voice and like having your voice in those rooms were probably like fire because you were in the trenches.
I'd be on mute. I'd be on mute a whole lot. Yes. I mean, we had definitely different outages where like you'd be on a headset, like a battery powered headset or whatever, and you'd be on it so long that the headset would die. There are some dark hours.
How big is like the team that's running all of these services and web services for that?
It would vary, 4 to 6, 8 at the max. Like, these are little teams.
Yeah.
Like, the engineering teams are huge. Like, we ran the channels, which was called Big Bowl. So if you've ever been to Chicago, there is a place called Big Bowl. It's a restaurant. There's also one in Reston, and that's where they came up with the concept for this. That's what they called the product of Big Bowl. Ran 200 DNS names or so, 70 channels across it.
I feel like 8 people was not enough for that. Like,
right? Hundreds of developers dealing with this thing.
You're giving me anxiety.
Itty bitty, teeny, tiny operations team to deal with it. And like, but that was the thing with the monolith, right? Like, you could serve all of this stuff out of one big spaghetti mass of code and then hope that the handful of people on the other end could figure it out when you screwed it up. So yeah, it was little teams, very small teams for all that stuff.
Yeah, no developers on call. Like, what even was like on call was you have like a USB like Directra SMS, right? Or
I had pager, like a legitimate, actual, real school Motorola pager that we were all assigned, and the NOC would call us. So AOL had a NOC, which you have to at that scale, really. And those folks were on all the time. They were based in Columbus at that time. And
what is a NOC?
So Network Operations Center.
Interesting. Okay.
So they're 24/7, 365, and just rotating teams, watching the blinking lights, and anything goes down, they're on the phone. They're calling you up on the phone. Something's down. Can you log in? You're like, well, yeah, I guess so. I was eating dinner, but whatever. Yeah.
So you're there. Did you use AOL chat rooms for coordination on your teams or anything? Or was that like
no, there were some weird shortcomings with the chat rooms in that you couldn't really put them together for teams. That made it super hard for us to use our own products to actually talk to people. So like, you think about Slack and stuff today, super easy. You can add as many people as you want to a channel. You couldn't really do that with the AIM stuff. So we'd use it for person to person, but we had IRC channels that we ran internally to talk in teams.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was IRC under the covers. It was like, this is where we. Yep.
That's crazy. I didn't think about that. But there were like, I don't think I've ever talked to like, unless you were in an actual chat room, I don't think I ever talked to people in groups on AIM. So that's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Slack definitely spoils us. Like, I can't even go to Teams.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just, Slack has ruined me for everything. I have friend Slack channels, like whole Slacks just for friends.
Of course.
Like,
yes.
It's like every old company that I went to, I have like an old coworkers like Slack.
Yes.
It's like, oh yeah, this is.
I've got like a nonprofit Slack, and then we've got like a friend chat. Like, just Slack has ruined us all. They know they've got us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so easy.
It is. Oh man, that's crazy. Just thinking about the fact that you couldn't even use AOL to do your stuff internally. It's just.
Yeah. And there was other stuff that was like you think about the product AOL Mail was very much consumer focused, but like, we're a tech team, right, at that time, and we want proc mail, rules to like move mail around and all that stuff that you couldn't do with AOL mail at that time. So even then, like operations had our own mail server on a different subdomain, and that's where we kept all our mail. Like it was just so divided from the customer experience. Probably not the best way to do that if you're really down with preserving things for the customer, but the consumer products weren't suitable for the users and the tech side.
It's interesting. You're like describing this wave that we see over and over again in any technology where it's like, oh, this consumer thing is great and it's mass adopted, but it's not flexible enough for the power users, for people that really like want to dive deep into it. And so we switch back to this, like, you have to run that yourself. And a lot of people ran their own mail servers for a very long time because they needed that power. They needed bigger scale, whatever. And then it consolidated and we're like, oh, now guess what? The consumer products get some of those features and bring some of that power into, oh, we can Gmail can just add filters for me and I can do those routing. It's all that stuff. And then I'm wondering what the next shift is going to be, what the next like gap in consumer features are that we're like, hey, guess what? Like maybe at some point, like the cloud makes things boring and easy. And then they're like, oh, but I can't do the thing that I need to. So I have to go buy a data center or buy some hardware, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it'd be super interesting.
I think we're already at that point. Look at how much people like running their own servers for like Mastodon and stuff. Like I think
those people are weird.
I remember being behind a startup and like in line for an observability booth, and people were talking about running servers in their grandma's like garage, and I'm just like, are we back to this? Like I'm like, I feel like we've already done this and bought that t-shirt. Like, is this cool again? Like,
right?
I mean, I never stopped, so I don't know what you're all talking about.
We know.
No, I don't run anything at home anymore. Like I used to have a whole bunch of stuff, but I've moved a whole bunch of times, moved abroad for a while, and I came back and I'm like, I think I'll just put all this stuff in the cloud. You know, I don't need to have it at home anymore.
See, all my stuff's in the cloud, but my kid wants to run stuff on Raspberry Pi, and I like blame Justin like osmosisly.
I mean, I've been running a home theater PC of some sort and a NAS at my house since 2005. Like,
sure.
Yeah. Well, actually, not when in college we had them too. We had them probably 2003, and ever since then, like I just kind of got hooked, and I've run them ever since. And it varies in what I'm running and what hardware and whatnot, but there's always something that runs locally, and I have backups and storage and stuff like that. And I do own some of that, and I don't need all the power. Like I want like the consumer version of it most of the time, where I'm just like, I just want something that works. But I paid for it once. Like my Plex server and my Synology, I was like 6-7 years ago that I paid for it up front. I'm just like, yeah, it works and we're fine. You described outages. You've described a little bit. All of your updates basically for like chat rooms were just like SSH for loops. So just like, here's the files, here's the new thing.
Yeah, everything came through as a tarball, and if you were lucky, it would be production ready. And if you weren't, you had to open the tarball, fix the config for prod, re-roll the tarball, and push it back out.
So you are one of the few people in the world that know all of the tar flags.
Yeah.
Like when you do that in production,
I know the old ones, and I use a hyphen, and like Tar's like, you don't need a hyphen anymore. What year is it? I'm like,
I leave the hyphen out. I'm like, no, I've done this in prod. You don't need that hyphen in there. Like that's just a wasted character.
I have so much muscle memory on this. Like, what are you talking about?
You did not say a wasted character.
It is a wasted character. You do not need the hyphen in Tar.
I'm done with you. When you're like, it's fine.
Like those are the things that like learning through that period of just like, I have to get this script right the first time because it's going to be deployed and I don't want to run the script again because then I'm going to like control C it in the middle of my for loop and I don't know which servers are good. So I have to do it all again. So it's like, you're going to learn the tar commands. I learned regex early on from that, and it just has stuck with me, and it's one of the best things that I learned because I'm just like, guess what, this applies in a lot of situations, and now that sed command is not scary.
No,
like I'm fine, like I'll get it on maybe the second try now, but it's just like, oh, these things are pieces that I learned through that's just doing it and struggling over and over again on call.
And that was one of the great parts about working on Unix platform just at the foundational level, is that there's like the individual tools are so neat and you could plug them together so well. So like, yeah, we're able to like read through machines.dat, pull things out with sed and awk and send it off to the for loop super easily. But we had our like scripts that would do whatever. And once we got to Java, so we migrated from AOL server to Tomcat in like 2006, I think.
War files. Now you don't get a tar, you get a war.
We get a war file with an XML config wrapped in it, which is a nightmare. And no good practice around making sure things are good and ready for prod. So we'd be unwrapping everything and then rolling it back up and pushing it out just to make sure. Because like one of the interesting things about AOL at that time was like the only place that I've really encountered that spent a lot of money on the non-prod environments. So like there was full deploys across for dev and integration testing. Because if you were going to integrate with the dial-up stuff, like there's this service called Unified Preferences that held all the backend information about all the users. If you were going to integrate with that and pull anything in, you had to load it up in the integration environment, make sure all that stuff worked. So I had all these environments and all this stuff. And like, we're always getting stuff to go into prod that was configured for dev and integration and not for where it was supposed to go for any reason.
What sort of data behind the scenes were you like, is this MySQL then? What was the...
It was MySQL. And one of the unfortunate things about that era was that there wasn't then a lot of open source out of any of those. Like AOL Server was open sourced, but there were so many other cool bits and pieces that AOL were, and Yahoo too, actually at the time, and that just never made it out into the world. So we had this MySQL servers, and they had this like proxy software in front of them called Atomics. I don't remember what it stood for, but it was basically allowed you to put HTTP calls into your database. So you could put it behind a VIP and do round robin across a set of databases that were all replicas of each other. And it made it super easy to deal with the databases. It would have been so neat if that thing had made it out into the world for other people to use, but it never did. But that was the back end of those systems was MySQL servers at the time. So yeah.
There probably wasn't a ton of choices for databases either, right?
No, because it was all commercial. So some of the older stuff ran on Oracle, but then the web stuff, to get the kind of scale out of it, you don't want to pay for Oracle.
Oh my gosh. I did not know that this was open source. Like I just found the GitHub, like GitHub/AOL server, last commit. Oh, there's one that was 2 years ago, but everything else is like 20 years, 19 years ago, 21 years. This is amazing.
Yeah, it's classic. So the other dirty secret of AOL server was that the guys at Bitly were AOL employees, and they took AOL server with them to Bitly. So there was some AOL server behind Bitly for a long time. I think they've migrated off of it now, but it was over there too.
There's your nsconfig tickle file right there.
There you go. Yeah.
This is way back. This is amazing. I love that.
Yeah. It's all there. If you want to run it, go for it, man. So, yeah.
It's also crazy because like back in, the 90s and early 2000s, like AOL and Yahoo were so big. It's hard to imagine how it is now where like Yahoo is barely existing and AOL is gone. It's crazy.
Which is funny because like sheer scale, right? Yahoo is still infrastructure and development bigger probably
so
now
huge
than it was then. There's just so many more people and there's so much other things to do that's like, these are still big things. They just aren't in the mind share and they aren't the like common thing you really think about anymore.
Absolutely.
They were like the biggest email at the time, like what Yahoo and MSN, like it was crazy.
And then Google came along like 1 gig of free email and everyone's
right?
Like, screw that. Like, I don't know. It's like when I was like deleting every old like 10 megs. I don't know what to do with this. Like I gotta.
Yeah.
Well, not just that, but Google has an integration to use your Google Mail for everything. So I'm just lazy and don't want to like make 6 different logins. And I'm just like, sweet.
Changed the whole landscape with that stuff. So, yeah.
So you left in 2011, right? And like this is like right around like DevOps was a thing. Like it was becoming like all of those lessons learned that you're talking about were definitely coming into view publicly for people. And they were starting talking about like, hey, how do we not throw things over the wall? How do we do this config management stuff? All that stuff. So what was it at like the tail end of like, oh, hey, we're going this direction or we're going to change everything to make it better, hopefully for the ops team or the developers?
Yeah, AOL wasn't headed in that direction when I left, right? So the Velocity Conference kind of kicked all this stuff off. The first one of those was in 2008. And then things kind of got rolling after that with like web operations being something that was like, you had to do it at scale. You had to think about things a little bit differently than people had been thinking about systems administration in the past. And also sort of taking into account, you can't do this at massive scale with these tiny little teams when you're just on the receiving end of a waterfall of garbage from the application teams, because they're being, slammed in the head for deadlines and all this stuff. Like it was just
features and
a number of places where everybody had just crazy expectations that no one was going to meet. So at the time that I left, AOL wasn't really headed in that direction yet. It was a very tumultuous time at AOL. They were ingesting the Huffington Post at that time. So that was a whole other platform they were dealing with.
Oh, I didn't even know they bought that. That's crazy.
Yeah, we were at 770 Broadway when HuffPo got bought, and they all come in, and like they took 2 conference rooms to be Ariana's office, and like she had like these nice couches. It was very nice. And we're like, what's going on? Oh, that's Ariana's office. Okay. Can't go in there anymore. But I think they figured it out eventually. Like there's still folks over there that are running all those things. Like all that, like I said, like the stuff is still there. Yahoo and AOL are now owned by, I think that's one entity. It was under Verizon for a while, and then I think they've been spun out or whatever, but they're all still doing their thing. And I think Kara Swisher had their CEO on her show, on her On with Kara Swisher podcast last week or the week before, talking about what they're doing over there. Because like AOL was the thing. If you were like a Midwestern housewife home in the middle of the day, like I know what you were doing because you were on all our systems. So it was kind of cool. Like you could see things. It was so much in the zeitgeist that you could see real life mirrored in the metrics. Like for things like the Super Bowl, right? You've got 2 quarters of play, halftime, 2 more quarters of play, and then you're done. So if you're watching at the time the sports channel, the rest of the channels at AOL, you see the traffic bottom out while the game is running, pop back up as everybody's checking their news and email during the halftime show, bottom out during the play, and then come back up to normal after the show. And you could do that for like any big stuff, the Emmys, the Oscars. It was crazy what you could see as a reflection of what people were actually doing in real life because we had so much of a view on it. Because it didn't matter. It was all in the monolith, whether you were looking at sports or news or weather or entertainment or anything. It was all there. We could see all of it.
Did you ever start recording any of that data or learning from the traffic patterns? Because I had a friend who worked at MSN at the time, but I think they were after they were they bought by Microsoft, something like that. But
Hotmail was the original product there,
and they were already kind of starting to like record clicks and data and like what people were like doing. And it's interesting because I feel like people are under the impression that collecting data and learning through data is something new, but we've been doing that for forever, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like, did AIM do that at any point or?
Oh, I'm sure AIM did. And on the website we did too. There were tracking pixels and other cookies and all kinds of stuff built into all the pages to know what folks would do, where they would click in different features so that you'd know, hey, they really engaged with this particular thing, but they didn't engage with this other thing. So we'll put more development onto this particular module, whether it was like a horoscope or weather or whatever it was.
Oh my God, I used to always check my horoscope.
You have to check the horoscopes, right? Like, I'm glad you did because they were a pain in the butt to load. So, like, they come in and that was important. But yeah, like, there was all kinds of commercial products at the time that were helping us out on all that stuff. We spent a lot of money on that because you want to push your resources to the things that people are going to engage with, because ultimately you're selling ads. And when you have something as big as AOL.com, you make all of your money for the entire year out of ads before the end of February. Like, you're making a lot of money to run that thing. It then gives you the capital to run everything else afterwards. So yeah, a lot of cash there.
I love just like the use of data to learn more about customers. So it's so interesting that I feel like people are almost outraged about like social media and different places taking your data to like learn about you. And I'm like, we've been doing that for forever, you know, like.
Well, and like the data then, like there was no metrics or even like open telemetry. Like, no, this is like, you're just looking at like AOL logs, right? Like this is like hit logs. It was just like, hey, this is how many people are coming through. I can scrape it and pull the IP address to get some basic information. But like that was the data, was an access log.
Yeah.
But it's gotten progressively, like just look at the Target thing where it was like Target was sending people baby coupons before they knew they were pregnant. And that was like, what, 15 years ago, 10 years ago? So it's like just progressively, the more data that people started collecting, they started using, and it's gotten more and more, I guess, accurate in some ways. But it's just interesting. Like there's so many different ways to use data to either sell or learn more or to improve your product. And it's crazy that we've been doing it for so long and it just keeps progressing.
And you wonder why people want to run their own servers. I don't.
I love that though. Like I remember I got to meet one of the ladies who did Alexa shopping or something at like Grace Hopper, and I was like, yo, you keep reminding me to like buy more popcorn. I love you. Like, I mean, to a certain extent, right? You don't want people to have like sensitive data, but we use that every day. Like Facebook's like, do you want this new pair of Converse? I'm like, actually, I do.
Right? Yeah.
Like, they're really cute.
And it's been an interesting evolution because, like you say, we really only had access to whatever tracking pixels they put on the page, and that went to the product managers. And on the operation side, all you really got is the access logs. So you can see regionally, who's coming in, where they're from. Do we need to then break things out so we're closer to those folks so you can make operational decisions? But then, yeah, you can see, hey, for whatever reason today, no one's engaging with this particular channel. What's going on over there? And they can look at that sort of impact of an editorial decision, or what kind of features they've published today that people aren't engaging with. And it's interesting in that it's real time without being participatory. The users aren't giving you more than what they're looking at. Like, if there's no data coming in from the user like there is with social media. So they're not telling us, oh, hey, went to the park today with my friend. They're just clicking on whatever information.
You see the actions,
Yeah,
kind of
just
like not the
reaction.
metadata. It's just like, okay, how did that apply to scaling? Because you mentioned this like during Super Bowls and those kinds of things, like the chat rooms would get really busy. How did you handle that on the back end, especially being on-prem and having hardware that you have to buy? If you're like, I need to scale this thing up and you have to make some operational decision, that's like a 6-month process.
You overbuild. Everything was overbuilt. Absolutely overbuilt. And when we had something like the .com or the channels or whatever that had to be in multiple locations for DR or whatever, like, you made sure that every location could handle all of the peak traffic at your anticipated peak. And we could look back, like, one of the other things that the AOL never got to open source was their monitoring system. And it had I forget its name. It was weird. There were like tuna boats or something involved. It was strange.
Wait, tuna boats?
Yeah. Yeah. That was part of the transports. I don't remember all the details there, but it was aggressive. Like, it was really, really good. And gave us a lot of information about, when you were hitting peak, and we could put custom data into it and like a bunch of other really interesting things that were unique at the time. And again, would have been interesting to see if it had gotten open source, what people would do with it. But it would give you enough to know, hey, you need to bulk this thing up, because like you said, there's no dynamic provisioning. It was all solid built, bare metal at that time. Everything has to be fully deployed.
You get the page and then you dust off those extra machines you had in the back and you're like, hey, these are going to be web tier now.
Right? If you need to redeploy, then you need to pull in the extra machines you squirreled away in some of the project and re-provision them. You might have to reload their operating system because they're on the last version, and then put on the run times and the current code and hook them all in, put them in machines.dat, and off they go. So they get all the hookups, because in the back end, there was like custom CDN and small object brokers and repeaters for commands and all kinds of other weird stuff they had to talk to for that particular platform. So yeah, there was no quick scale up. So we're overbuilt all the time on all those platforms.
Again, I'm so grateful for the cloud.
Absolutely.
Also, I just feel like that is amazing. Like, you lived in a really exciting time, even though I feel like it must have been very hard at the moment. But I mean, you've got like street cred, Mandi. Like,
I mean, we learned a lot of stuff, right? Like, and we learned that push sucks, right? To deploy stuff. So you want a pull-based deployment as much as you can, because like, you don't know what's down out there. You've got 1,000 machines any given time. 1 or 2 of them are probably offline, taking a nap, doing something. Like, all that stuff. And deployment, being ready for prod, like, that was a huge thing to try and teach engineers to think about, because they don't know anything about prod. They don't know what prod looks like.
Well, they're just learning how to code, right? This
Exactly.
is early 2000s. They're just like, I don't know.
Right?
Let's learn the language and bang out some characters, ship it.
They're busy trying to figure out Tickle, man. They got no idea.
is there anything you miss about like those times, like being an engineer in those times compared to now?
Oh, no. We eventually had a pretty good relationship with the engineering team. And I feel like if you're in certain kinds of DevOps or SRE type deployments, you might not have as good a relationship across like lots of engineering teams that we had. But that took work. Like, that was hard to try and persuade people to like come to the table with us and talk about, hey, we want your stuff to succeed. We're not here to turn your stuff back and make you go back to the drawing board with it. Like, we want to be able to deploy your cool stuff into prod, but you need to work with us on this. So we eventually had pretty good relationships with most of the engineering teams on the content side that I hope other folks have. Like, you hope that you have a nice mutually beneficial relationship with all the people that you're working with. But the other stuff, like putting tickets in and requisitioning storage and like dealing with all that nonsense, absolutely not. Overbuilding and wasting so much power and energy.
That's crazy. Yeah.
For some of that stuff to have that running.
So much money.
Yeah, all the cash that went into it. It was of its time. And yeah, I like the cloud much better.
That's wild to me that people don't want to have a good relationship with the engineer team and the SRE team. Like, you need them. That's like when people talk crap about QA and I'm like, you better be nice to those people.
It's all symbiotic. You all rely on each other.
Not just that, but we're all in the same struggle. Like,
yeah. Everybody gets paid out of the same success, right? Like, you all got to do it. So,
like, your life's going to suck if their life sucks. So why don't you just work together? Like, that's crazy.
Mandi, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about it.
It's super fun. Absolutely.
Where can people find you online? If people want to reach out and say, hey, by the way, my AOL is still down. Like,
I can't help you there. Mostly at the time these days, I'm on Blue Sky. So I'm LNXCHK on Blue Sky. You can also find me on LinkedIn, just as /in/Mandi Walls. And I'm in the Hangops chat. If folks out there in Hangops, I'm hanging out in there on Hangops.
I forgot about Hangops. I used to do Hangops all the time. That was great. Yeah.
Yeah, Hangops. Still busy Slack.
Is that a Discord? Where's Hangops?
That's a Slack.
There's a Slack.
Yeah.
Yep.
Come join
Hangops Slack.
Okay, I have to go join that now.
Thank you so much, Mandi.
All right. Thanks so much.
If you're anything like me, you have a certain tendency to put things off until the very last minute. Seeing the dentist, going to the doctor, home improvements, that never-ending chore list of yours. And while most of the time it works out just fine, the one thing in life that you really cannot afford to wait on is setting up term coverage life insurance. You've probably seen life insurance commercials on TV and thought, yeah, I'll look into that later. No, later doesn't come. This really isn't something you can wait on. Choose life insurance through Ladder today. Here's what we love about Ladder and why we allow them as a sponsor. They are 100% digital. No doctors, no needles, no paperwork when you apply for $3 million in coverage or less. Just answer a few questions about your health in an application. Ladder's customers rate them 4.8 out of 5 stars on Trustpilot, and they made Forbes' Best Life Insurance 2021 list. You just need a few minutes and a phone or laptop to apply. Ladder's smart algorithm works in real time, so you'll find out if you're instantly approved. No hidden fees. You can cancel anytime. Get a full refund if you change your mind in the first 30 days. Ladder policies are issued by insurers with long, proven histories of paying claims. They're rated A and A+ by AM Best. Finally, since life insurance costs more as you age, right now, now's the time to cross it off your list. So go to ladderlife.com/changelog right now to see if you're instantly approved. That's LADDER life.com/changelog.
Thank you so much, Mandi, for coming on the show. And we would love to talk to you again in the future about a lot of other things. So hopefully everyone enjoyed that. Also, if anyone out there listening, if you used to run infrastructure, especially like 90s, early 2000s, we would love to talk to you for more of these retro episodes. We got at least one more lined up. And I love talking about this stuff just because it was so different and people forget what it was like.
It's like talking about your childhood.
Yeah, there's some nostalgia to it. And then there's some of just like, I don't want to ever do that again. And so email us, shipit@changelog.
It's also really cool just seeing how far things have come. The industry's really kind of gone through like an evolution. It's amazing.
Things have changed a lot in the last 20 years. And I don't know what the next 20 will look like.
Well, it's interesting with all the use of AI and all the things that people are, the different infrastructure that people are used. Like, I feel like when I first got into tech, CI/CD and like green blue pipelines were like the new cool thing, and now they're like the old thing all of a sudden. I'm like,
if you're not doing that,
whoa, yeah. I'm like, whoa, how did we get here?
Yeah, so I like the looking back and just seeing how things were. So feel free to reach out if anyone else wants to talk about it.
Also, can we have any excuse to talk to Mandi again? Like, we should just make stuff up to talk to her again.
She also has a podcast, so people should. I'm going to drop that in the show notes too, because people should go check that out. So it's part of a PagerDuty podcast. They have a lot of different hosts, but
I want to listen to it. Me and Mandy have to be besties after this.
So for today's outro, I have a fun game that we're going to play again.
I'm slightly scared.
Yeah, you might want to be. This one I don't have a.
Oh no!
There's like no good name for it, so it's just like an acronym.
I'm really sad that you don't have an acronym for this.
Well, no, it is an acronym, but I couldn't make it spell something. So
Darn.
it's the letters are JDCO, but that didn't spell anything. So it's like DOJC. I don't know. So we're just gonna go with whatever we want.
I'm disappointed that this isn't some weird name, but okay.
Yeah. Well, so it stands for Java, Data, Cloud, or Other. And those are your multiple choice questions here for projects we're going to talk about. And all of these projects are part of the Apache Foundation. And so I was scrolling through the Apache Foundation and I was just like, they have a lot of projects. Almost all of them have to do with either Java, Data, Cloud, or Other.
All the things I love.
And so I was like, this might be a good one, Autumn. And so there's some that might be kind of obvious and you're going to pick, one Java, Data, Cloud, or Other. So like Cassandra, Apache Cassandra. Which category does that fall under?
It's a database, but it's also built in Java and it's got an Apache license.
Right. And so all of these would be like Apache name something, and they all have Apache licenses. The vast majority of them are written in Java. And so this one, I would like data would include databases and data processing at some sort. So like Hadoop is another one, right? Like Hadoop is a data processing. So
also a lot of streaming in different ways, stuff like that. So
yeah, there's a lot of that in here. And this is why I wanted to talk about it and see if what we think they are.
I'm terrible at remembering names though. So
most of these, I did not even remember what they did. I knew the names of them and I'm just like, where would that fit if I was guessing this? So this is kind of for the audience to learn a little bit about just what projects exist and kind of where they fall. So like CouchDB, that's another one that you probably know.
That's a database.
And I didn't even know that was an Apache project. I honestly did not know.
It was weird. At Google Next, I saw a whole car wrapped in CouchDB stickers. It was very interesting.
That's one way to use those conference stickers.
They also gave me popcorn and a donut, so I'm totally their friend now because there was a donut involved.
How about Apache Ant?
That is, I'm pretty sure, a Java. Is it a framework?
It's a build tool. It's a Java build tool. Yeah. So yeah, it's a Java thing. So yeah, you'd get that as Java. Let's see. How about Cloud Stack?
I'm gonna go with Cloud.
Yeah, it's definitely a cloud. It's like the Apache version of OpenStack in many ways. Oh. It does a lot of that like self-hosted.
I didn't know they had a Apache version of that. That's interesting.
Let's go with Flink. Flink.
Data?
It is data. It is a data processing engine, and so it's kind of I think it was stream processing, if I remember correctly. Guacamole.
Java.
This one would fall under cloud. It's it's a HTML5 remote desktop protocols.
That's a cool name. Like, is there a salsa that goes with it? Is there chips that go with it? Like, can you imagine if they had like different parts and one was like salsa bean dip?
You're just building out a menu.
Yes.
Here. This is like, okay, we're gonna go to the Mexican
now I'm
restaurant.
Hungry, damn it.
I used to manage a VDI virtual desktop environment. And so Guacamole wasn't part of that, but like I knew of Guacamole a long time ago. I'm like, oh, this thing is so cool. It does remote desktop through a browser because usually you needed clients.
Oh, that is cool.
Yeah. So it's all HTML5.
I might go check that out.
How about Log4j?
Oh, Java.
That one falls under the CVE category. Okay. Apache Brooklyn.
Ooh, Brooklyn. Interesting. Cloud?
This one I'm going to put under Other.
Oh, okay.
It is a framework for modeling, monitoring.
You didn't tell me Other was
that's
option.
The O. That's the O.
Oh, I feel like you just said Java, database, and cloud. But okay.
And there was another because I have a couple in here that are Other. It is a framework for modeling, monitoring, and managing applications through automatic blueprints. So it's like making blueprints and then stamping out these applications. And I don't know where it's used. I don't know who uses it. If anyone knows, let me know. Yeah, I didn't hear of this one. This was just kind of a fun, like, what does that do? Flume, Flume.
I think Flume's data, isn't it?
It is data. It's a log aggregator.
Yeah.
VCL.
Java? I've never heard of this before, I'm guessing.
VCL is cloud.
Oh.
It's another like VDI cloud connection environment. This is specifically for like, I think managing the like infrastructure side of it.
Interesting.
But yeah, it's like I think Guacamole is a component in there, but they have this like more larger platform, more like a Zen desktop.
That's a missed opportunity. They should have named it Salsa, obviously. Like
Probably, yeah. This one made me mad.
oh no.
This one's called Unicorn, but it's Unicorn.
I don't know, but it better be fabulous because they named it Unicorn. It better not suck. I don't know. How old is it?
It's pretty new. It's newer.
Cloud?
I would put this under the cloud category. It's a scheduler for Kubernetes. So they have it's called under the description with standalone resource scheduler responsible for scheduling.
Kubernetes gets all the cute stuff. Kubernetes and Salesforce gets all the cute stuff. There's never like cute stuff for Java. Like it's so annoying. Like that's it. I'm going to start. And then what's that new Kubernetes adorable thingy? And it's like all cute. I'm gonna start writing Kubernetes, damn it.
Fippy? Do you mean the Fippy, the
new
characters?
one that they just like released. It's like Ubernetes.
Oh, Ubu, never. I can't say it.
You guys always get all the cute stuff. You have all the funnest developer advocates. Like JavaScript and Kubernetes get all the good stuff, and it's not fair.
Sorry, you can just join the club. It's fun.
Damn it. Now I got to go learn how to run Kubernetes.
But Unicorn is mainly, they say it's scheduling batch jobs, long running services, and large scale distributed systems. I'm like, that's pretty much all of the things. So I don't know how the difference is, but on their website, it also said it focuses mostly on like ML stuff. So I think it's ML/batch.
Interesting.
Yeah. Pig, Apache Pig, PIG.
I don't know. Data?
Yep. Good job. A platform for analyzing large data sets on Hadoop.
Interesting.
I don't know the type. Like Hadoop is like elephant, so like pig is, I don't know. Roller.
Cloud?
This is other. It's a blog platform, all written in Java, and it ties into Maven. I'd never heard of it before in my life, and I was like, all right, fine. And the very last one, let's go with, this one's called NutX.
What?
NUTTX. Someone lost the naming battle on that one. NutX.
I just know what? Why do you set me up for these things? Data? I don't know.
It's a real-time operating system. It's a Linux operating system for real-time embedded systems. So it's an other. But yeah, I'd never heard it before in my life.
You can tell a dude named this. Like, why? Like
NutX. Okay, there we go. And now it's an Apache project. So thank you everyone for listening to this episode. Thanks again, Autumn and Mandi, for coming on and joining and talking about AOL chat rooms. And we will talk to you all next week.
See you guys.
3, 2, 1.
Thanks for listening to Ship It with Justin Garrison and Autumn Nash. Subscribe now if you haven't already. Head to shipit.show for all the ways, or just search for Ship It wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find us. Thanks once again to our partners at Fly.io, to the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder for these dope beats, and to Sentry. Use code CHANGELOG when you sign up and save $100 off their team plan. That's all for now, but come back next week when we continue discussing everything that happens after Git Push.